In 2001, I went to Tokyo, Japan, and I had 3 goals. My first goal was to train in Judo because I'm a very keen Judo player, and I wanted to go to the source and learn Judo in its land of origin. My second goal was to learn Japanese, and my third goal was to become more familiar with Japanese culture. And surviving in Japan in many ways required turning things inside out and upside down. The Japanese language is in many ways very, very different to the English language. The grammar is kind of back to front compared to how English works. And my living situation completely changed. I went from having a lot of personal space to having almost none. I was living in a tiny room with just a couple of tatami, a couple of Japanese mats to call my own. And it also required taking a very different approach to my Judo training. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, I'll tell you a little bit about Judo. Judo is basically a form of grappling, a bit like wrestling. And the objective is that you have to try and grab hold of your opponent and throw them with force onto the mat, and at the same time stop them from doing the same thing to you, which requires having a good defense. Now, when I arrived in Japan, I'd already been training in Judo for many years, and I had a pretty good defense, or so I thought. I went on the mat feeling very confident about myself, and I got thrown all over the place. It was actually very disheartening. I thought I was pretty good, and it turned out that I wasn't so good. And my senseis, my teachers, kept telling me to relax, 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 relax. And I was thinking that this was kind of strange, because when somebody is trying to bury you in the mat, the last thing that you feel like doing is relaxing. And so they continued to throw me all over the place. And eventually I started to think, well, maybe they have a point. I'm going to try relaxing and see if that makes a difference. And surprisingly, it did. Let me explain why. If you think about a tree in a storm, the tree has very deep roots that hold the tree in place. And the storm blows and blows and blows, and the tree tries to stay in place. But if it's too rigid, then eventually it's just going to fall over, right? However, if the tree is flexible and moves with the wind, it can absorb the force of the wind, and when the storm is over, it's still standing. The same idea applies in martial arts, and particularly in Judo. Someone is trying to use their strength against you, you can absorb it and move with it. And the more relaxed you are, and the more flexible you are, the better your defense, and ultimately, the better your offense as well, because you can turn their energy against them. Which brings me to the point of my talk. So I came here today to talk to you about resilience, which is a very big topic, and there are many, many things that I could say about resilience from my own experience and from the people that I know. But there's really just one main idea that I want to discuss with you today. And that's the idea of being relaxed and flexible. Relaxed and flexible. Just as I learned to be in the dojo in Japan. So how does this apply outside of martial arts? How does it apply in our life and work? Well, first of all, let's have a look at a definition of resilience. There are different definitions of resilience, but basically resilience is the ability to deal with situations of adversity, to deal with difficult situations, and then to bounce back. And therefore, resilience is a very important quality to have in your life in general, and also in business. Resilience is not a fixed quality. You can build your resilience up like a muscle. You can train it. You can increase your resilience. And your resilience can also be depleted if you go through a particularly hard time, or if you're faced with a situation that you've never seen before and which you don't know how to deal with it. Now, as all of you know, we're currently in the middle of a situation which, for most of us, is very challenging. We're in the middle of a global pandemic, and it's a situation that none of us, nobody in this room, has ever had to deal with before. And in many ways, the pandemic is a bit like a giant wave. And it's very destructive, it's very disruptive, and it can be lethal. Many people are getting sick around the world. Some of them are unfortunately dying, but there is a huge amount of collateral damage as well. It's disrupting people's work, it's forcing businesses to close, and it's also having a massive impact on people's mental health. And in some ways, we're probably going to have to deal with the consequences of this pandemic for the rest of our lives. Now, we have an option, we have a choice in terms of how we deal with this situation. We can stand still and hope that things are going to go back to normal eventually, but I don't think that's a very wise approach. In fact, I think that standing still and being very defensive and very rigid and holding on to old ideas about how things should be and how we should behave is a bit like standing on the beach when there's a tsunami coming. If you do that, there's a very good chance that you're going to get flattened. So I don't think that's a very good idea. What I think is a much better approach is to ride the wave. And what I mean by that is to have a relaxed and flexible approach to the situation of adversity, to this very difficult and challenging situation, and to focus on the things that we can control. And those things might be very, very small. Just like when you're surfing, you might make a little adjustment to the left, a little adjustment to the right, while you're riding this huge wave. And depending on your resources and depending on your level of resilience, you may have more or less control. But for just about everybody, there will be some room for maneuver and some room to be flexible, and thereby you can develop the capacity to deal with this very difficult situation. Now you might be thinking, well, okay, Tom, that's a very nice metaphor, but how do you actually develop that skill? Well, I think that it all starts in the mind. Flexibility is first and foremost a mental capacity. And the best way that I know of to develop the capacity to be relaxed and flexible is meditation. Now, I don't know how many of you have tried meditation, but I have to confess that when I first tried it, it was absolutely horrible. I closed my eyes and I tried to focus on my breathing, and it was a bit like stepping out into a busy road and trying to dodge a bunch of crazy drivers who were trying to run me over. It was really very unpleasant, and I was not very successful at it, and I thought, screw this, I don't want to meditate anymore. This is horrible. But the thing is that if you feel like that about meditation, it's all the more reason why you should meditate. Because your thoughts ultimately control your actions. And if your thoughts are like a bunch of crazy drivers driving like absolute maniacs, then that means that you are less able to deal with difficult situations. So meditation for me is a bit like doing a kind of mental reboot. It's like taking the rubbish out every morning. It's like the first thing I do, wake up, make a cup of coffee, and I will meditate. And I do it at the beginning of the day because it's like a clean slate, clearing my mind of difficult, confrontational, and sometimes quite upsetting and stressful thoughts so that I can begin the day with a fresh approach. And the amazing thing about meditation is that anything is possible. So you might be dealing with a situation where you're experiencing a huge amount of stress, but when you meditate, you can imagine any kind of positive situation that you could possibly conceive of. And I find this extremely empowering. The other great thing about meditation is that it can be done at any time and in any place, and regardless of your state of health. Even if you're sick and unable to do anything else, you can still meditate. And in fact, a few months ago, I had to have dental surgery. I had my wisdom tooth out. And while the dentist was drilling through my jaw, I was meditating. And I was able to, in a way, dissociate myself from my body and go somewhere else while he was drilling through my skull. And I kind of imagine my body as being a bit like a car that was undergoing maintenance. Like I said, anything is possible when you meditate. Now that might sound a bit funny if you've never experienced that, but it actually helped me to get through a situation that would otherwise be rather unpleasant. I certainly don't normally enjoy going to the dentist, and I don't know many people who do. Now, that brings me to my next point. The practice of meditation, like any practice that builds resilience, is something that you need to make a routine. Ideally, something that you do every day. Why is that? The reason is that if you don't make it a routine, if you don't do it as a matter of course, then it won't be there for you when you need it, because you haven't made a proper commitment to it. And therefore your resilience muscle is weak. And routines in general are very important for developing resilience. To give you another example, a friend of mine spent a bit of time in prison. Now, he didn't do it, and he was ultimately cleared of all charges, but he was in there for quite a long time. And he was in there with some people who were lifers, so guys who were serving life sentences. And the lifers kept telling him, man, you've got to make sure that you do your push-ups. And my friend was like, why do I have to do my push-ups? I'm depressed. I don't want to be in here. I didn't do it. I just want to get out of here as quickly as possible. And they said to him, you have to do your push-ups. If you don't do your push-ups, this place will break you. So eventually he started doing his push-ups. And it helped him to get through this situation, which was extremely difficult, stressful, frightening, upsetting, depressing. Why is that? Well, it's because routines give us something to hold on to. And they give us a sense of control, even when everything else is going to shit. So that's why I meditate every day. But I don't just do meditation. As I mentioned earlier, I also practice martial arts. Or at least I did, until COVID-19 came along. Now, for obvious reasons, at the moment, it's pretty much impossible for me to do my usual martial arts training. So that routine is out of the picture. So when you're not able to practice your regular routines, you replace them with another one. And in my case, I have meditation, running, which I've replaced the martial arts with, and then other things that I like to do as well. When one of my routines is not there for me, I have something else that I can fall back on. So I have a kind of mesh of interlocking routines that I practice every day or nearly every day, so that if one falls out of the picture, I have something that I can fall back on. So how does this apply to business, this idea of flexibility? Well, most of you have probably come across the idea of a pivoting. A pivot is basically a change of direction. So to give you an example, Berghain, the famous techno club here in Berlin, obviously can't open its doors as a nightclub at the moment, because the last thing you want is thousands of hot, sweaty people in close proximity to each other in an enclosed space. So what they've decided to do is convert the club into an art gallery. That's an example of a pivot. So pivoting is an application of a flexible mindset in a business context. However, when you pivot, it's very important that you pivot with your customers' needs and interests in mind. It's no good deciding that you're suddenly going to become an art gallery, for example, if nobody wants to come and see your art. So you need to think about what your customers are actually experiencing and how their needs might have evolved and in which ways you can help them. So to conclude, in an adverse and challenging situation, such as a pandemic, standing still is a recipe for disaster. And even though the pandemic may be a very challenging, difficult, stressful, scary situation, it is also an opportunity for us to discover new things and become more resilient and to learn, grow, and develop as a result of turning things upside down and turning things inside out. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I have one specific question for you. Do
Yeah.
you have a recommendation how to start meditation? Like, do you have a good app you can recommend or a good book?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said earlier, when I first started meditating, it was horrible. And I had so many false starts with it because it was just unbelievably unpleasant.
Because of thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that, it's not like my brain is completely fucked up. It's more just that when you are just alone with your thoughts, until you have trained your mind to some degree, you can find that experience of being alone in your head is just completely overwhelming. And so the way that I finally managed to get into it was to make it as easy as possible for myself. So the first thing that I did was to try a few guided meditations. So I tried Headspace, and I think Headspace is good for some people, but I found the guy's voice really annoying, which was, but yeah, so I thought, okay, no Headspace. And then I found some guys on YouTube called The Honest Guys. And for some reason, I quite liked their guided meditations, so I did a few of those. And it was a bit like having training wheels when you're learning to ride a bicycle. And so I thought, okay, I'll just go along with that for a while. And then once I got used to that, I took the training wheels off and went back to trying to meditate on my own again. And it was difficult again, but this time I set a timer. So I'd try and do 2 minutes because I thought, okay, I can do 2 minutes. So I'd do 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, until 2 minutes felt too short. And then I went up to 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, kept doing that. And then 8 minutes, then 10, then 12, then 15, then 20. And it got a bit easier with time. I won't say that it's always easy now, because it isn't. And it depends on the day. And I think that it is more difficult when you're going through a stressful time, but that's when you need it more. So I've learned to recognize that when my meditation is difficult, that's a signal that I should do more of it, you know? So yeah, but yeah, there's many apps out there that you can use to sort of help you get started. Calm is another one that many people enjoy. So yeah, but there's no right way to meditate. There's different ways of doing it. I keep it super simple. I close my eyes and I focus on my breathing. And sometimes I'll find that a particular train of thought will start to dominate. And I don't let myself get too worked up about that. I just try and let it drift past. And then within a few moments it will go and something else will come up. And then it will drift past, and then something else will come up and it will drift past, and so on. Yeah. Yes. But I wanted to come back to the point that you made about going online. So a lot of businesses recently have been pivoting online. And that makes total sense, because if you can't do stuff offline, then you think, well, let's do it online. But there's potentially a problem with that, because everybody is going online. And now, sort of 6 or 7 months since the lockdown happened, people are getting a bit sick of it. I mean, why are we here today? As opposed to doing it on Zoom. And so I think that there is actually an opportunity for businesses to be more offline as well, because people start getting nostalgic for tangible experiences. So as a business, in addition to doing online marketing, it's also worth considering, for example, printing nice brochures. So people have something nice and tangible in their hands. When we were having a coffee earlier before the talk, I was admiring the menus in the bar, because they're really hefty. You know, a nice metal plate. It's like a metal plate with the menu actually bolted on. I'd never seen anything like that. And the experience of picking it up and flicking through it was really pleasant. You can't get that experience online. So it's something to consider as a business owner. Yeah. Yeah. I think, just to re-emphasize this point, you'll find a lot of inspiring quotes floating around, and people say, oh, you've got to embrace change and you've got to be positive and all this sort of stuff. But the thing that I'm most interested in is, yeah, okay, how? Because unless you have the how, it's just fluff. That's why I said in my book, there's no fluff in this book, because there will be the idea, and then how do you actually do it? And so that's why I said in the talk that I just gave, okay, if you're not sure how to relax and be flexible, then practice meditation, because that's something practical that you can do, which will train your resilience muscle. And because anything is possible in meditation, because your mind becomes a blank slate, then whatever happens in life, whatever shit the world throws at you, it's something that you can premeditate on when you are sitting there focusing on your breath. And the more you do it, the more mentally resilient you become. But of course, again, don't just depend on meditation. You can have other things that you do to build your resilience, whether it's martial arts or yoga or drawing or whatever it may be. So that if one of your routines, if one of your practices is not possible for whatever reason, then you've got another one that you can fall back on, so that you have a kind of mesh or stack of routines and resilience-inducing behaviors that help you to become more resilient.
Yeah,
final thing. If any of you want to read my book, then you can find it on Amazon. It's called The Hustler's Guide to the Pandemic.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you.